Hello, and thank you for joining us for Vermont Film Essentials. My name is David Metzger.
And I'm Lincoln L. Hayes. What are we talking about this week, David?
Happy Halloween, first and foremost. Today we are talking about George A. Romero's, may he rest in peace, his 1968 zombie masterpiece, Night of the Living Dead.
Originally entitled Night of the Flesh Eaters, which was the source of all the copyright hell this movie ended up in. Romero's film debut, and what is now considered the creation of the modern zombie. We had zombies in Italian cinema, we had zombies in Haitian folklore and Caribbean folklore, but never to the specifics that Romero laid out, which then others would emulate. My first viewing of this was, probably college. It struck me as odd that it was public domain at that time, and I was like, wait, what? What do you mean?
Right.
How can a movie be public domain? Isn't that like copyright and stuff? Right. How does that work? And we'll get into all that copyright nonsense in a bit, but I just remember, at the time, thought it was slow. Thought it was, coming from the 2000s and the 90s where everything's polished and fancy and all that stuff, to the basis of all of those things. We talk about it all the time on this show of when you go back to the source material, sometimes you can be like, oh, I see where everything came from. But this one, you watch it again, you're like, this is just a blueprint on how to make a low budget horror film. And it's got great unintended social commentary. It's got solid effects, pretty good performances from some amateur to semi-professional actors, and it just really does a lot for the horror genre, and I enjoy the poop out of it. How about you?
So same thing, first year in college. Somehow I got through high school not seeing it, even though I know I had friends who was like,
Sure.
Evil Dead, Night of the Living Dead, all the Dead stuff. But my first year in college, it was actually like my first cinema class, and they showed, I can't remember which came first, but they showed The Road Warrior and Night of the Living Dead. And
Interesting double bill.
right, and as I think back on it, it's like, it seemed like the professor was like saying like, okay, here's a good way to think about American cinema as well as independent cinema. And if you all want to study films or make films, here's two films that I think are emblematic of what should be done with cinema.
Sure.
Because they are commercial, yet make a point and have a vision. And same thing with me, like as we're in the class watching Night of the Living Dead, the fact that it is low budget, that it's black and white, that the acting while ending at the end of the movie, you say, wow, they actually were really good.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you're kind of like really kind of like sneering at it.
Yeah. The scenes with Johnny and Barbara, you're just like, ooh.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like the ending happened, and I remember feeling that holy crap moment, but it not really having a lasting effect on me.
Yeah.
Until Shaun of the Dead came out, and we all went to go see it. And I think even before we went to go see it, we like rewatched a couple.
Yeah.
I know we watched Dawn of the Dead, and I know we watched Night of the Living Dead.
Of course.
And like I started to think about it a little bit differently and kind of gain a little bit more of appreciation. And then when we were all in Shaun of the Dead, it was like, I don't know about you, but I feel like that is one of my favorite memories, seeing a movie with my friends in college, was that movie, because we were all just howling at it. When he says, "We're coming to get you, Barbara," and we're just like, yes. But same thing with that movie, because they did it, because Shaun of the Dead is so well done and so well written, and they pay homage to something while also being its own thing.
Right.
But the same thing with that movie, like that movie's going along and you're having a good time, you're having fun, and then all of a sudden it gets dead serious. And you start to feel and you have an emotional connection to it. And, you know, watching it again last night, the political, like I noticed a lot more of the political stuff throughout and how he threaded that needle.
Though he claims he didn't.
He claims he didn't, but I don't know, man, because...
I think at that point in the 60s, it's just ingrained in you.
Right.
And whether you meant for it to be that way or not, I think it just happened that way.
There. I mean, there's just no other way to see, because I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, this resonates even today. And that they were reacting to Nixon and all the stuff that was going on politically at that moment. It's the same thing today, and you know, there's no other way to look at that ending.
Right.
You know, with the stills that come up, and what that does to you emotionally as you're watching it, because there's no other way you look at it, and you're like, oh my God, that's civil rights. That is, I'm watching a civil rights documentary right now.
Right. But the fact that it wasn't originally scripted for Ben to be a black man, but he ended up being the best actor. It was just blind casting. And then Romero did rewrite the script a little bit to reflect Dwayne Jones's performance and his mannerisms and just his essence. It was originally scripted that he was going to be kind of like a brass trucker type guy.
Right.
And then when Dwayne Jones auditioned and got the part, Romero was like, oh, that doesn't really work with you and your type. I'm going to make adjustments. And I think that it's subtle enough, and you feel that it's there and it's never overt, and I think that's what works so well. And honestly, this movie, take out the zombies, it's like we said on the Halloween special, which you haven't seen yet. You take out the zombies and put in something else, and it's a human story about people trapped in a house, dealing with some impending force upon them. And you know, a lot of people don't like gore, they don't like zombies, what have you. This is still a movie that you can appreciate despite the zombies. And that's why it is an effective horror film.
And I think like that, and that, as we're talking about horror films more and more this month and thinking about them and watching them at home, that seems to be a guarantee. Like you create a claustrophobic environment, and you create an environment, whether it's a haunted house or something to get your characters trapped into. And that's just it's just a perfect ingredient for a horror film. But then whatever is outside, whatever the monster is, it's moot at that point, because you're just dealing with what the characters are dealing with. And you can put any, you know, any meaning, any metaphor that you want to put into it, you absolutely can.
Prime example, Cabin in the Woods.
Yes.
They put them into the cabin and then experiment with different fears, different ways to get them and to torture them. It doesn't have to be a singular thing. It can be anything, as long as they are trapped somewhere where they can be surrounded and they can be pursued.
There's something about this, I was thinking about this last night, because there's I forgot the newsreel footage where they pretty much explain where the ghouls and the zombies come from. I forgot that.
Yeah, I did too.
But watching it, I'm like, this movie, the screenplay and the way that it's presented and done, there's so many things in this movie that I know I've seen in other movies and hate.
Yeah.
But somehow it works in this.
Because it's the first time?
That, or like, I don't know, it's just something about the way that it's done though, because...
because of this movie, I want to make a apocalypse world-ending movie that's only news clips.
And it's so...
And I think that it would work.
Right.
Because of this movie.
But even that, it's like, there's a not really a rule, but like there's this Hollywood myth or standpoint that, you know, keep the news out of your story, because it's only going to, your movie's not going to last and your movie's not going to resonate, because whatever the news people that are coming in, they're just disrupting what your characters are going through. Right. But somehow in this movie, like that's the perfect that they find that television and that they now can get information. That's how we get information through the news. Still, maybe it's the cell phone now. But it just seems like it's a perfect, like that's why I don't buy the fact that Romero didn't know what he was doing when he did it, because I mean, everything is just, it opens with a shot of, so they drive into the cemetery and there's a big close-up of an American flag stuck in the ground. And you don't have a shot like that unless you mean it for something.
Right.
And it seems like everything that he's leading this movie towards, the statement that he wants to make, is right there in that first shot of saying, like, this is what that flag means right now, is that we're all leading to this awful, horrific discovery. And there's even like the little things, like we talked about the mist in the Halloween thing, and like how I dug it, but I don't, like, it's not one of my favorites. I don't love it to death. But there's things like, I know he was influenced by Night of the Living Dead, but he has things like, there's characters that are representative of a political mindset.
Absolutely.
Right? And at a certain point in that movie, there's an explanation that deals with the government. And somehow those are the two things in that movie that I hate, because I think Marcia Gay Harden's character is like, it's just not a credible character, and it's just too on the nose, and just like, you're obviously a character representing,
you're an archetype,
this, and it's just not believable. Same thing with the government explanation. Like, anytime a monster or something is being explained to me, I lose focus, and I'm just like, I don't care, because that doesn't fit into what I was thinking.
You know what I think it is? I think it's non-specific enough in this that you can put all the pieces together on your own without them saying, this is because a satellite returned from Venus, radioactive material, and somebody, it's like all of these little theories and all these little pieces that you then have to put together.
Right.
And I also love, speaking of Shaun of the Dead, at the end when they discredit that. They have just this little throwaway thing, again in a newsreel, where they're like, any claims of extraterrestrial material have been discredited or whatever. And you're like, okay, good. It shouldn't make sense. Right. There shouldn't be a reason for this to happen. Right.
And also in the scene in Night of the Living Dead, when they have that scene, so it's, I think it's a scientist, a general, and then there's a third party. Is that another scientist? Or
I think he's like a politician.
Yeah. So here's your three representatives of, and this is why I was looking at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's what's going on now. Like, because the scientist says that explanation.
Yeah.
The politician is saying, like, nothing is, set in stone yet.
He's being diplomatic. Oh, we're pursuing every avenue we can.
And as he's explaining the whole thing about the Venus and the probe and the radiation and everything, you see the general is just shaking his head like no, like, one, don't say all this information like out in public. Right. And two, like, we don't know for sure, but when we do, we're going to take care of it. The military is going to take care of it. And you see like that, just, I think that is why, because like you said, it's like not set in stone.
You don't have the general sitting down and saying, this is going to be the position of the American government. You have three experts. You have the three branches of thinking, politics, military, and science, fighting and disagreeing and not able to come to terms with what it actually is. Science is saying one thing, the military is worried about another thing, and then politicians are worried about a completely other thing. And my favorite part about that is that it's George Romero interviewing them walking down the street. You're like, oh, that's a nice little cameo for you.
And that same level of confusion is the same level of confusion that's going on inside that house.
Yeah.
And that, what I took from that is that in this heated political climate that we're in right now, all we can do is yell at each other and fight with each other, and we don't get anything done.
Yeah. We're going to do that until the house burns down.
Right. And they don't, like, they put these plans in motion, but because they cannot ever see eye to eye,
they can't cooperate.
Nothing gets done and nothing works.
And you see Romero expound upon that in his later Dead films as well, where small plans work, but nothing grand works. Like what they're able to do is hide. And I think there's something in that too, that with everything that's going around us, the easiest and smartest thing to do is just hide from it. But eventually, it's going to break down your door, and it's going to come in, and it's going to get you.
Right.
What are you going to do? It's fine to hide for a little bit, but while you're hiding, you need to figure out a plan, you need to be cooperative, and you need to work together.
Right.
And none of the people in this movie do that, and that's why none of them make it.
I also found, like, it struck me, just watching it last night, that the irony that, so Ben, the whole time, the argument is, we got to stay in the basement. And Ben's the one like, no, we got to stay up here. We got to fight them off. If something happens, we can be here. We can respond to it.
Right.
And at the end of the film, he ends up in the basement.
Yeah.
And because there's no other way. And I realized that irony there, and just the fact that like we were saying, like this film, you can attach. There's like every archetype represented within the group. Even a political archetype that you can place on it. Like you can say that the husband is the conservative.
Head in the sand, not going to pay attention to it, we'll just wait it out.
Right. Self-serving, like, you know, I'm going to protect me. And
he has that great line, he's like, I'm safe and so is my family. Why should I help anybody else?
Right. Right.
We have a lot of that right now.
And the fact that it is a movie that, you know, for being a commercial film, for being a drive-in movie, that it is counterculture in a way that it has an African-American lead actor in that hero role.
Right.
And then the second to that is the female role, and she has, you know, something to do as well.
Right.
And that those are the two things that we get to attach ourselves to.
Right.
You know, this is part of my favorite. It's leading into my favorite era of filmmaking because, you know, from like '67 on through the 70s, you have these group of young filmmakers that are like, I'm sick and tired of everything. I'm sick and tired of the old way of Hollywood filmmaking. But I know in my back pocket that I can't dismiss genre,
right?
Because it's how I'm gonna have success.
Right. Also knowing that, oh, maybe I could use this genre differently.
Right.
Maybe I could use aspects of horror to tell a very personal or political story.
And because they are politically minded, and because they have, you know, a lot, because they're full of piss and vinegar, and they have a lot to say, they can't help but infuse whatever they're doing, whatever the film they're working on, with a message.
Right.
And with, you know, I have something to say and I have a voice, and Daniel, you're going to hear it, whether I'm telling a movie about zombies or not.
Right.
So you got like films like Easy Rider, you've got Medium Cool, you've got 5 Easy Pieces, and right there with it you've got Night of the Living Dead, because what all of those films have in common, because there's certainly nothing that brings them together story-wise, is that they all start from a commercial basis, but then all of a sudden just dovetail into something more serious, and end with an ending that just like terrifies you.
Yeah, you're not walking out of any of those movies like, well, that was fun.
Right.
You're walking out going,
Jesus,
I had never thought of that.
Just before I forget. So Roger Ebert didn't do he never really officially reviewed the film, but he put out a journal entry of the first time that he saw the film, and later said that, you know, had he reviewed the film, he would have given it 4 stars, like he loved it. But one of the things that he said that I love is that the kids in the audience were stunned. There was almost complete silence. I don't think the younger kids really knew what hit them. They were used to seeing horror films, sure, but this was something else. I felt real terror in that neighborhood theater last Saturday afternoon. And that really is how you see this film, because, you know, even Robin was saying this morning, it's like, I forgot how, like, not just horrifying, but just how deep and how affecting it got at the end of that film. And that like when those still images come up, it's just like a like slap in the face.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like I'm watching it and I'm like, this film could be done today and it would still have that resonance and that horrifying, empty, terrible feeling.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, I had this thought today that it's like, you know, is it hopeful to think that that dread, that apocalyptic feeling that we're feeling right now was happening back then too?
Sure.
And that hopeful, like, you know, there's a way out of this?
Yeah.
Or is it, you know, just that we don't learn?
Oh, we don't learn anything. Like, history repeats itself over and over and over again. You see this post-World War II. You see this Vietnam War. You see this Cold War. You see this, you know, in films of the early 2000s, post 9/11. You see it now with ISIS and, you know, all the civil rights issues that are going on in our country as it is. And while this movie was remade in 1990 to mixed reviews, it's a timeless story. You could very easily tell this, you could make this movie again. And so much so that when I was living in New York, there was a NYU student who did a remake of this, and I played the radio announcer.
Cool.
Yeah. So when that came on, I'm sitting at my desk working, and the radio thing comes on. I'm like, well, this sounds familiar.
I know this.
Yeah. One of the only films to ever be released unrated, because it was right before, like a month before, the motion picture rating system was implemented in 1968, and it was released on my birthday in 1968.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and Roger Ebert even says something about that too. It's like this is really like some serious dark stuff, and that, you know, he goes on and says like censorship is never the answer, but with this rating system coming out, like I feel like, you know, the young kids probably shouldn't have been in the theater.
Yes.
But
I mean, it's
they were
pretty
able to.
horrific.
It is.
And thank God it was shot in black and white, because, you know, you learn later that they use chocolate syrup for the blood and things like that. But there's some pretty graphic stuff that happens in this movie. And especially for the time. Like, you see that now, and we talked about it on the special, that Walking Dead just did a 180 on anything that these movies were trying to accomplish with the violence and the gore.
Right.
And just took it up to an 11er, like, how can we murder people graphically on television?
And get away with
And
it.
get away with it. That's all they're doing at this point.
And that's like, it's hard. Like, I'll try not to talk about The Walking Dead too much, because I can talk for a really long time about how much but I hated that as a viewer, that I was like, it's like, oh my God, I gotta wait 5 months to see who dies.
Yeah.
Like, what type of
that?
feeling is that?
Yeah.
Like, who wants to have that feeling?
I mean, Game of Thrones does it too, but at least it's in a fantasy world where that kind of thing happens, whereas Walking Dead's Atlanta in an alternate timeline where zombies have taken over, and these people that you've grown to care about, and they're survivors. The other thing about, I mean, the difference between it and Game of Thrones is those are soldiers or people who get caught up in a conflict, and it's awful and terrible when they die. Whereas Walking Dead, you want them to live, you want them to make it. And then the show just undermines everything that you're feeling and everything that you're working towards to be like, ha-ha, got another one.
And its creators want to set up an atmosphere and set up characters that you can identify with, and you can say, like, you know, what would I do in this situation? Or you know, I know someone like that. With Game of Thrones, like you say, it's got the sheen of fantasy, and like, it's like these are people that, you know, we don't see in our own backyard.
Right.
No matter how great the performances are.
Right.
Yeah. All right, done with Walking Dead.
Let's talk about the copyright issue that this film had, because this is an anomaly. I've never heard of another film having this problem. So in the 60s, up until only maybe a year or so later, in order to be copywritten, all you had to do was file the copyright, and it needed to be written on the print, and then you were fine. And the distributors of this film were Walter Reed Organization. And what happened was they had copywritten the title Night of the Flesh Eaters. And then they changed the title of the film to Night of the Living Dead, but didn't update the copyright. So Night of the Flesh Eaters, copywritten. It's in the books. Night of the Living Dead never got it. So then they're just like, well, this is public domain then. And they're like, well, wait, whoa, this is our movie. What are you talking about? They're like, well, you didn't copyright it. So it's this really minuscule technicality that then cost Romero God knows how much money.
Right.
Because he saw little to no profit from this film. And because it's public domain, it can then be released by this company or that company, or somebody overseas, or somebody in Asia gets a bootleg and they release 100 copies of it on DVD or VHS or whatever. And as of, I think, April of this year, it's on a bunch of different sites that you can watch for free. Internet Archive, YouTube, and a third one that I can't think of, maybe Hulu. But on Internet Archive, this is the most downloaded film of all time at like over, what did I say? 2.8 million downloads of this film. And Romero didn't get a cent from that, which is why Tom Savini actually remade the movie, because he's like, this is unfair that this movie's out there and it has all this acclaim and everything. And he went to Romero, and Romero agreed. He's like, yes, the only way I would do this remake is if it were true to the original. And actually, he reunited with John Russo, the co-writer of this film, and one of the other producers, to make the remake. But since Romero couldn't be as involved, Savini hated working on that movie because he felt like the producers were stifling him every step of the way. And he's like, I couldn't do anything that I wanted to do. I couldn't make the movie that I knew I wanted to make and that George wanted to make. And part of that comes through in the critical response of the film, where they're like, well, why did you bother?
Right.
We already had this. This is almost the same movie. What's the point? And the point was to get it back in George's control. And he was able to go on and make all the other of the Dead films, but this is the biggest and the best. And he just got hosed by it.
And it stinks because now everything that comes out that is zombies owes everything to it.
Yep.
And like, you get the people like Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg that, hail him and give respect to him.
Galen Hurd of Walking Dead,
Right.
Speaking of.
But then you have like people like, we talked about with 28 Days Later, what
Danny Boyle
said afterwards, and it's just, it's harsh. Like I want to think that, because I like Danny Boyle, and it just seems like something like a big foot in your mouth moment, where why would you say something like that?
Or immediately you're like, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant.
Right. Or that he just got misquoted, or like, it was a long day in the interview session.
Oh yeah, press junkets are the worst. And he's just like, I don't care. I want to go home.
Right.
Let me go home.
Something I want to just talk about is, because it was such a low budget film, it's a great example of a filmmaker using that low budget to his advantage.
Definitely.
Because even the decision, whether it was because black and white was cheaper or not, even that decision pays off, because that ties into the ending with the stills and the stark black and white imagery. It creates this mood, and the fact that the effects are not able to show too much, but only show a suggestion.
Yeah. It goes along with what we were talking about Texas Chainsaw too, where less is more.
Yep.
You see the little girl when she reanimates and she gets the trowel and she's stabbing her mother. You don't see her stabbing her mother. She's stabbing, and then the mother's reacting. Stab, 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 react. Different shots, nothing graphic about it, except that it's a little girl appearing to stab her mother. The mother gets the chocolate sauce all over her, and then you see some chocolate syrup splurred on the wall.
Right.
And knowing that it's chocolate syrup, you look at it and you go, yeah, that's chocolate syrup. Because it's too thick, it's too viscous, it doesn't look like blood. But at the time and in the moment, you're like,
Right.
Look at all the blood.
And that's the thing, like the whole, like the final 10 minutes of this movie, like there's so much stuff that happens that is just crazy. With the two kids blowing up in the truck, them getting eaten, and then the little girl coming back, killing her father, and then killing her mother with the thing. It's just like, jeez.
What happens to Barbara? I missed it.
Oh, it's like the
Because it was supposed to end differently than it does with Barbara
right.
specifically.
So she, her brother comes, and
Right.
she sees him, and then she's just like,
Johnny!
yeah, and then she gets pulled into
The mob.
yeah, and then, I mean, I assume,
And then Ben's on his own.
yeah. And even that I didn't remember. I didn't remember that Barbara got pulled into the pit like that.
Yeah, I didn't either. Like, I remember they're coming to get you, Barbara, and all of that. And I didn't really remember the beginning scene. That's how long it's been since I've seen this. But in my mind, it comes down to Ben on his own in the house. And he almost makes it.
Yep.
And then the redneck posse comes. Just get him right between the eyes. And that's it.
That I mean,
I
don't know if he was just like he's just that guy, but that guy that plays is just nails it.
I think he's that guy. Strangely, this is the first film ever filmed in Pittsburgh. Which, whenever I hear that, I'm always like, really? Like, the Jaws is the first movie ever shot in the ocean. I'm like, but really?
Right.
No one shot a movie in the ocean? I mean, I guess. All right. But Pittsburgh, it's not a film town, so that makes sense. And I respect Romero for filming and or basing his subsequent films in Pittsburgh. I think that's cool.
Yep.
Like Shyamalan. Shoots in and around Philly.
Or Kevin Smith. New Jersey.
Less him. It's pretty sad that I'm putting Shyamalan above Kevin Smith. But then again, Shyamalan's at least trying to do something different with each film and not just tangent. Kevin Smith is rebooting
I know he
Jay and
broke
Silent
your
Bob.
heart.
He's rebooting Jay and Silent Bob.
Of course he is. It made money. He's not making money.
Move on.
How many times did he say, I'm done with Jay and Silent Bob?
Like 6.
Right. You're lying, Kevin Smith.
You're a liar and steal my money.
There's also, like, you can tell George Romero is very much a fan of horror films, because even like with the screenplay, it feels like a nod to Rod Serling, because it feels almost like a big Twilight Zone episode with a big shock ending at the end that makes you almost like a Planet of the Apes moment of like, like, oh my God. But also like Richard Matheson, who wrote the I Am Legend, and then that got turned into a couple of movies.
One with Vincent Price.
One with Vincent Price.
One
Last
with
Man
Will
on Earth.
Smith.
But
Great story.
But it feels like this film actually honors, even more so than the Vincent Price Last Man on Earth and I Am Legend with Will Smith. Like, this film honors the message of that film better than those two films that are supposed to be based on the source material. So you can tell that Romero is very much a fan of horror, and even like last week we're talking about the 50s science fiction and the atomic age. And having it be that radiation has caused this, perhaps, is a very science fiction idea, and even that is in there.
There's always that fear of radiation, of the atomic age, of, in this case, the unknown of space, and this is the year before we go to the moon.
Yep.
Who's to say we go to the moon and there isn't something crazy up there that they bring back and then they kills us all? That's what the movie Apollo 18 is, which actually, the more I think about it, the more I'm warming up to the idea. But first time I watched that, I was like, this is so stupid. But it's I should give it another watch.
Is it a found footage?
Yes. Yeah. And that immediately turned me off. But there's some good to be found in that movie. So it initially made $114,000 upon its release, which translated to now money is almost $800,000. And it grossed $30 million, which now is $210 million, which is roughly 263 times its budget. So this movie Romero would have been set. Like here's a thought. Imagine how good and how polished and how just shiny and big Hollywood Dawn of the Dead could have been if he had seen any of that money.
Right.
But instead, he's like, well, I'm glad you liked it. If you'd like to help me finance my next movie, I don't have any money now. And that, I mean, his whole career trajectory would have been different after that. And I don't think that he would have been such a cult icon. I feel like he could have been more mainstream, because he does go on and make movies like Martin and The Crazies and these other films that people love. They're widely regarded as great films, but he's still just that cult director.
Right. And it's hard, like, would he have been better? Would he have been, like, would he have developed? And even if it had been polished, like, yeah.
I mean, I feel like the ideas and all the elements of the story would have still been there, but like the makeup wouldn't have looked so pasty, and you know, they could have had, I mean, they have so many extras in Dawn, but they could have, it's just crazy to think about. It'd be like if Jaws were a huge success, but they screwed up the copyright and they called it like Killer Fish, and then Spielberg didn't get a dime of it. There wouldn't be any sequels.
Right.
He probably wouldn't be the Spielberg we know him to be today. I know. That's crazy to think about. This was one of the first films to show really graphic murder on screen, because you know, you see people getting shot, or you know, a lot of stuff happens in the kind of the Greek theater way of like it happens off screen. That way, you know, you hear a gunshot and then you see what happens. In this movie, you see the violence happening. You see people getting set on fire. You see them getting hit with things. And I mean, you don't see Ben put the tire iron through the guy's head, but he pulls back and then it's all right there. And it was also the first to have a black main character, which is just awful. But here we are, two white guys in 2017 bemoaning something that happened 50 years ago. What are you gonna do? What else have I got here that's fun trivia? Oh, you mentioned the kids blowing up in the truck.
Yep.
When the zombies are there, picking through them and eating them, that was ham covered in chocolate sauce.
Yum.
And Romero said that that was probably the most nauseating thing that they shot, because they're just like, oh, that's really disgusting. This film was one of the first added to the National Film Registry in the Library of Congress. And in the first scene with Barbara and Johnny, when she crashes into the tree, which never made any sense. I guess he has the keys? Yes, because she keeps saying, Johnny has the keys.
Right.
So when she's rolling down the hill and then she crashes into the tree, he added that in because the car they were using between the first shoot in the cemetery and that shoot got in a car accident and got the fender dented. So he's like, all right, well, there, just run into that tree.
And that's the thing, like that when, as a young filmmaker, like you want to, like those are the stories that you love, because it's just like, okay, when something like that happens, you know, seize the moment and just grab it.
How do we use this? How do we fix it?
Yeah.
We had that happen actually in the first film that I made in college, Tuesday, where it was 3 vignettes with the same character. I wrote and directed the first piece. Kyle Anderson wrote and directed the second piece, and then we worked on the third piece together. So between the first and the second, his character gets attacked by zombies. And when we went to shoot the second thing, his car didn't work. So we had to borrow somebody else's car. So we then had to invent an opportunity for him to ditch his car and take another car. And it's just those little moments where you're like, all right, well, what do? We very clearly used your car in the first one. Right. We can't just have you driving a different car. All right, well, steal it from somebody else. So he's sitting there and his car's broken down and he's in front of a Blockbuster, but you don't know it because you can't see it. And a guy pulls up and leaves his car running and runs in. So he just walks over and gets in his car and runs away. And those little pieces of filmmaking, at least for the filmmakers, are the stories that you tell.
Right.
You could talk about, the lenses and all this other stuff, but more often than not, you're going to tell the stories of when things get messed up.
Right.
And you just got to fix it.
Right. And then and that when the audience is watching it, they don't know that horror that guys went through of having to figure that out.
Yeah.
And that they're not able to ascertain that there was an issue like that
Sure.
is part of like the magic or the craft or whatever of filmmaking, of saying like, you were presented with a problem, and rather than, falling back or saying like, oh man,
we'll delay filming until we can get his car fixed.
we just push through it.
Just like, well, let's just use Ryan's car. Done. Great.
Use it.
Unless you're a crazy person like me, who sits months and months and months waiting for a location, only to have the wife be like, we don't need the location. We
Backyard.
just use the backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's shoot it next weekend in the backyard. Great. A year later, we shoot the thing. That's me being dumb, guys. What else do I have about this wonderful film? Oh, it spawned the splatter horror subgenre. There weren't really any of this type of film until this came out, and then from then on, everybody. I think it was a moment of aha, of like, you can do that, you can do this, you can make these kind of movies, and I know it certainly was for us in college, because we watched these and we're like, all right, let's just go make a horror film, and we did.
Right.
We, had a wig that I played 3 different zombies in the thing, and one of the shots we put a styrofoam head on a stick with the wig, so we established me and the wig coming at him. We cut to behind the dummy's head, and then he knocks the head off with a stick. How else would you think of that stuff unless you see this kind of movie and you're like, we can do that? Chocolate syrup, you say.
And that's what is so great about this movie to filmmakers and to film lovers is exactly that. Like, that's why it is so influential. That a group of filmmakers got together and was just like, I've got this crazy idea about zombies. It's, it may not work, it may not be anything,
sure,
but I've got this story and this vision that I want to tell. And they scrap together all the funds that they need and whatever they can get together, and they just go and they make this movie.
They borrow people's cars, they use people's houses, whatever you can get. And
that turns into one of the biggest cultural sensations of all time. One of the most highly influential horror films of all time.
Right. And going into it, they weren't like, guys,
this is going to be important.
We're making history right now. Right. They're just like, I hope we get this done.
Right.
I hope we get this done, because we can only be in this house for another day. So we got to get this done. And they're not thinking about, man, great story that I did want to share. Once they were done with the edit, they threw the film cans into a car and drove to New York City. They drove all night, and their intention was to just go from theater to theater until they found somebody who would show the movie. And then they'd be like, great, we're going to show it. And on the drive to New York City, they heard on the radio that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. So any theories of like, oh, this is about, MLK getting assassinated or anything like that, it hadn't happened yet. Like, it happened months after they were done. And then they premiered it in Pittsburgh, and then they had a bigger premiere in New York City, and they got a standing ovation at the premiere. I can't wrap my head around that. Making something that has that much of an impact on people. Someday, hopefully.
And then it's worth going back and just studying as to how they did that, because whether you believe him or not, that he says like, I had no intention of making it a political statement or whatever. He knew that something like this would get people excited, and like, everyone loves a horror movie. Everyone, zombies or ghouls or whatever, like, it's a thing that we can use. It's fairly easy, just put the makeup on them, have them stumble around. And that he knew that he could use that to to lure the audience in, and then shock them. And then say, I've got something more to say than just a silly drive-in zombie movie.
Right.
That's what's because it's just, you can see the bad version of this movie where at the end of it you're just like, well, that was pretentious. This stupid zombie movie trying to tell me a message about life,
Right.
Or about the world. But somehow it's not. Like somehow you just get so.
It's the purism. It's the pure essence of a storyteller telling a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the creature features we talked about last week, and slasher films and stuff in the 80s where they're like, this is a cash cow, let's make money. This wasn't a cash cow yet. This wasn't even a cow. This wasn't anything. He said, I have a story I want to tell. The framework of it is that there are these undead things coming at them. And how do people in peril react and work together or not work together? Mm-hmm. And then anything subsequent is just like, let's have some super messed up stuff happen involving zombies. And you compare season 1 of Walking Dead to current season of Walking Dead, and that's what it is. It's merchandising and money. And this didn't have either of those, so you get a pure story with a great message that leaves you thinking about it 50 years later.
Mm-hmm. And you kill the hero at the end of it.
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of guys come over with hooks and...
That's it. You think we made it, you think everything's going to be fine, and nope, the world knocks down the door and ruins it. Whatever victory, small victory we had in this scenario is going to be destroyed by what's going on in the world. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me from the film is it's almost like a video game scenario where like, all right, we beat the big boss, but then after the big boss, there's always a bigger boss. And in this case, like you beat the big boss and then you're immediately killed. Right. And then game over and you're like, wait, what? Why did I try? And it's like, well, that's life. Mm-hmm. You beat the big boss, you're still going to die. Be it, redneck posse shooting you in the head or something else happening. And that's something that James Gunn did very well in the Dawn of the Dead remake too, where they get out of the mall and they get to the boat and they think that they're going to be fine. And then they get to that island, and that island is worse than anything else was. Mm-hmm. So everything you think is going to be better probably sucks too.
Right.
Ben thinks, oh, if we can wait it out until somebody comes, we'll be fine. Question is, if he hadn't been the only one left in that house, do you think they would have shot all of them? Because they're basically just killing anything they see.
Right.
And that's kind of Romero's point, was that they don't check to see if he's a zombie first. They're just shooting to shoot.
Because they don't care.
Right. And the trouble is, everyone has given them that carte blanche. Because they're like, oh, you're doing something about it. We're going to follow you. Mm-hmm. Nobody's going, whoa, has anybody thought this through? Are we going up and making sure that they're zombies? Because it's very easy to do. You can tell from a long way away. Wave at them. Do they wave back? No. Probably a zombie. Mm-hmm. But they just sniper shoot Ben through a window, and they don't even bother to see if he's alive or not.
Right. And it's almost speaking of George Romero and having, being a fan of the genre, but even something like the Lord of the Flies, at the end of that movie, so the military comes in a helicopters and saves the kids, but then you're left with
the fallout of all that.
Who's going to save them?
Yeah.
And the same thing with this. It's just yeah, we survived the zombies, but how are we going to survive us?
Yeah. Because civilization and society is obviously broken down and we're in a militia state. But then at one point, do you take it back from the militia? When do they allow you to? And that's how you end up in certain political climates.
See, that's what I love about movies, but also what I love about genre films when they're done well, because that you can have this level of discussion about it, and that you can continuously watch them and have more to find and more to see and more to talk about.
Because how many horror movies, first film horror movies from directors, can you rewatch and find timeless social political commentary in them? Mm-hmm. Very few.
Right.
A lot of them are great films, and you watch them and you're like, wow, that's really good, or you're impressed with the filmmaking at the time. Mm-hmm. But very rarely can you really dissect it and be like, intentional or not, there's something in this that's really, really true.
Right. because the only thing in the horror genre that you can compare this to, within the last 20 years, so Blair Witch Project, right? However, I don't want to watch the Blair Witch Project again, or talk about it, or talk about whatever the heck they were trying to do, because unlike this film, like I feel like that film was just an empty vessel, and they just found a way to.
Yeah, they invented a gimmick.
Yes.
This film did so much more than that. Like, you don't watch Blair Witch Project and go, oh, you know what? I bet he represents what's happening in the Middle East.
Right.
No. You're like, hold the camera still. You're making me sick. And thanks for creating found footage, you jerks. Because now we all have to suffer through that nonsense.
I remember very plainly in the theater watching it. Camera drops, goes to black, credits come up, and this woman in the back of the theater standing up and being like,
yeah.
And that's what we were all thinking.
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, final thoughts on Night of the Living Dead. We didn't even really talk about Return of the Living Dead or any of the
Dawn of the Dead.
Russo films. John Russo was the co-writer of this film. He and Romero got into a creative spat following the release of this film and agreed to go their separate ways. Romero going into Dawn, Day, Land, Diary, and Survival of the Dead, and Russo doing Return of the Living Dead, and then I think 3 sequels after that, and just kind of going opposite directions in what zombies are. Romero sticking with the rules that he had established, them being slow, staggering around, more about the people and what's happening to them. And Russo's, from what I understand, because I haven't seen any of them, just get weird and wacky and stupid. And that's where the idea of zombies eating brains comes from, where that's all they do. They're just like, for some reason, you're reanimated and you have this desire to eat brain. Not even just flesh, brain. And in one of them, I'm told, a bunch of zombies attack some cops. And then over the radio, they're like, what's going on? Tell us what's going on. And one of the zombies picks up the radio mic and goes, send more cops. That's when you turn it off, and you break it, and you read a book.
You lost me, Russo.
Because zombies don't talk. Even in Day of the Dead, Bub kind of learns to talk. And that's a stretch where you're like, what is this? What's going on? The whole point is that it's a faceless mob. And within that mob might be somebody you know. And that's why Shaun of the Dead works so well when Barbara turns, because it's heartbreaking. What do you do? She's not your mom anymore, Shaun.
Right.
I love Shaun of the Dead
It's
so
a good
much.
movie.
It's my top 4 on Letterboxd. I love it.
It is. It's great.
Yeah, I got the Dawn of the Dead pin right here. Watch his films. Watch the first 2 at least, because they are classics. And I wish that we could talk about Dawn of the Dead too, and maybe we will at some point, because that is such fantastic commentary. There's race relations, there's gender relations, there's consumerism, there's the military-industrial complex, there's like gang violence and all of this great stuff within a zombie movie set in a mall. It's wonderful. And then the remake actually improves upon it and makes it modern and relevant and accessible. And it's good. It's a good flick.
I love horror movies.
Me too.
I love that I can say that now.
Yeah.
Because the little me that once said that they didn't like horror movies was stupid.
That's like me saying I don't like tomatoes. Now I love tomatoes. Horror movies.
What was I thinking?
Horror movies are your tomatoes, David. So more tomatoes. Since this film is in the public domain, you obviously can watch it online anywhere. Film Archive, or Internet Archive, Hulu, I think, and YouTube. I just watched it on YouTube, and I have a Roku, so I was actually able to beam it from my phone to my TV and watch it on the TV, which was a delight.
Yeah, we did a similar thing and just downloading it and watching it on the TV.
Mm-hmm.
Since it is in the public domain, I think Criterion would be very apt to get this into their collection. And
50th anniversary's coming up, guys.
Just did this new 4K transfer that's supposed to be beautiful. That's the bad thing about knowing that it is in the public domain and how there's so many, different versions put out by so many different outlets, is that you get that one and you're just like, God, this looks awful.
Mm-hmm.
Because just no one.
You find that bad link on YouTube and you're like, ugh. But then you look again, you find a good one, you're like, okay.
Yeah.
But they did find an original print, and they did do the restoration and all of that stuff. So hopefully when it is available, if it's not already, it's a good one. And I will seek it out.
So Night of the Living Dead, it still resonates, it still has an impact. It is still influential if you want to make movies, or you just want to grab a camera and get out there and do something with it, or even as a writer, just being like, oh my God, there's so many stories to tell.
Look at the structure of this movie and how seamlessly it brings characters together, and
how it works and why.
Go to town.
Yep.
Cool. What's next week?
Next week, very happy. So next week is going to be our 30th episode.
Wahoo!
Oh my God. Rachel is going to be joining us back in this chair, and we're going to be talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
And the camera's going to work this time.
Yes, it is, and you're going to see her, and she's going to be right here, and she's very, as you know.
She's lovely.
She's a knockout, and you're going to see her. And she's going to be talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is one of my favorite films, so I'm very excited.
And she's stoked to come back on. Hope you guys enjoy the Halloween special as well. Working hard on that, and that will be out before this episode drops. But obviously it will live online as well. So yeah, awesome. I guess that's all we have. Thank you for doing Halloween month. Horror movies are so fun to talk about, and this has been a delight.
It's fun, right? I can't wait for the next one.
I know. Great. So until next time. Oh wait, you have an announcement.
Yes, I do. For fans of the show, people watching, last summer, oh my God, I can't believe it's been a year, but we made a feature film, and it's called Northland, and it stars this gentleman right here, and Rachel, and my friend Andrew, and it is a thriller set in Vermont, and it's pretty exciting. I can't wait for everybody to see it, but it's going to be hitting online on November 17th, and that's a Friday, so look for it online.
What else is November 17th, David?
My birthday.
It's David's birthday!
It's my birthday. My gift to all of you is the movie Northland.
Yeah, I made another year. Here's my art. Great. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
Cannot wait. All right. Cuckoo's Nest next week. Northland next month. And we'll see you next time. I'm Lincoln L. Hayes.
I'm David Metzger.
Bye.